This is the story of a French trawler running aground on the west coast of Scotland. At about 11:16 p.m. on the 31st of January 2011, the French registered stern trawler, the Jack Avery II, grounded on the Isle of Rum, in heavy weather, well on passage to her intended fishing grounds. The Malag all-weather lifeboat and the Stowaway Coast Guard helicopter deployed, and the crew were airlifted off the vessel. Some oil pollution resulted, and the vessel was subsequently declared a total loss. There were no injuries. The MAIB investigation established that the skipper, who had been alone on watch in the wheelhouse, fell asleep and failed to make course alterations. He had joined the vessel the day of the accident after traveling from his home. It is likely the skipper became fatigued through a combination of personal stress, a prolonged period without sleep, and poor quality rest before leaving his home. The wheelhouse watch alarm was not used, nor was the best use made of available navigational aids and the crew. The boat was a 46-meter French registered stern trawler built in 2005. She was one of three sister vessels used to trawl off Scotland and Ireland. The vessel was based in northwest Scotland and only returned to her own port in France once a year to complete maintenance and mandatory surveys. Fishing trips generally lasted 9 to 10 days. When her catch was landed, it was transported to France by refrigerated trucks. She was manned in compliance with her safe manning certificate with 14 crew. With the exception of a Senegalese and a Polish deckhand, the crew were all French nationals. The skipper had 32 years fishing experience. He had been the vessel's permanent skipper since her delivery. She landed her catch during the early hours of January 31st, 2011, and did a partial crew change. The permanent skipper, who was part of the crew change, set off from his home in France early in the morning on the 31st of January to rejoin the vessel. His journey involved a 3-hour drive to catch a flight to Inverness, followed by a 2.5-hour minibus transfer to the boat. By the time he had arrived to the vessel at 2 p.m., he had been awake for around 11 hours. He had slept for a total of about 14 hours over the previous 3 nights, including 4 hours during the night before his departure. The length and quality of this sleep had reportedly been affected by anxiety caused by domestic issues, although he had recently commenced taking prescribed medication for an unrelated medical problem. He had reportedly suffered no side effects as a result. Upon arriving on board, the permanent skipper immediately began to prepare for departure. He assessed the weather forecast, which was poor and likely to stop fishing in the northwest of Scotland for the next 4 days. The forecast was, however, more favorable in the south of Ireland, and the skipper decided to undertake the 2-day passage south via the Irish Sea. A formal passage plan was not prepared. The skipper's practice was to follow historical tracks on the chart plotter without the use of waypoints or cross-track error alarms. The usual quick turnaround having been completed, the boat departed at 2:30. The weather was reported as southwesterly, force 10 to 11, later easing to force 9. The sea was rough with moderate visibility, reducing to poor. The skipper and the mate were both in the wheelhouse for the departure. After about 30 minutes, the mate went below, leaving the skipper alone in the wheelhouse. A while later, the skipper made a brief telephone call home, but this failed to reduce his anxiety about his domestic issues. At 4:30, he was relieved by the mate to enable him to take a meal break. 2 of the crew were celebrating their birthdays, and the skipper had 2 glasses of whiskey with them before having his dinner. He returned to the wheelhouse at 6 o'clock to take over watch, although the mate remained talking to the skipper for about 2 hours before retiring to his cabin. At this time, the wheelhouse was warm and stuffy, Between 9 and 10, the skipper undertook paperwork at the chart table and then sat in the wheelhouse. He was navigating on autopilot and using two radars, one set at 6 miles and one at 12 miles. The chart plotter located in the front of the seat. The plotter display was partially obscured as he was sitting with his feet raised on a protective bar placed in front of the screen. The owner had installed this bar after the display had previously been damaged by a watchkeeper resting his feet on it. A second chart plotter had been switched off as the skipper was using this computer to listen to music. However, the alarm was switched off and was rarely used as it was considered an annoyance. At 10:07, the skipper made a small altercation to his course to pass another vessel, and he altered course back into the attendant track. Although the skipper normally came off duty at 11, he decided on this occasion to remain on watch for a while longer. Not only did he want to navigate the vessel through the sound of canna before handing over the watch, but he also perceived that the mate was tired and would benefit from more rest. The only other person on duty was the third engineer in the engine room. With the vessel approximately 4 miles from the Isle of Rum, the skipper misinterpreted the radar display, which was showing extensive radar clutter from the squally showers. This caused him to lose situational awareness and believed that the island was further away than it actually was. His next recollection was of the vessel running aground on the Isle of Rum. The accident occurred around low water at 11:16, with the vessel making 13.5 knots. The skipper's initial instinct was try and drive the boat astern, but he then activated the engine's emergency stop and sounded the general alarm. He also sent DSC and SAT-C distress alerts. Stowaway Coast Guard deployed the all-weather lifeboat and the Coast Guard helicopter, while the French Coast Guard contacted the vessel by satellite phone and established that she was aground. With a slight port list, but no immediate danger, the crew mustered and donned their immersion suits before moving to the forecastle. No damage assessment was conducted as the skipper considered it too hazardous to send anyone below. The vessel's two 20-man life rafts were successfully deployed as a precaution. At midnight on the 1st of February, the skipper reported a 50-degree port list to the Stowaway Coast Guard. The all-weather lifeboat arrived on the scene at 12:30, at which time the vessel was partially afloat and rolling. The lifeboat crew confirmed that fuel was leaking from the stern. 120 tons of marine gas oil was on board. The all-weather lifeboat crew offered to try and tow the vessel off the rocks, but the skipper declined. At 1 a.m., the helicopter arrived on the scene and winched all 14 crew safely off the vessel. 2 of the crew, but not the skipper, was reported as smelling of alcohol. No alcohol or drug testing was conducted following their arrival in Stowaway at 2:26. By the time the all-weather lifeboat returned to the scene later that morning, the boat had settled a short distance along the coast. The ongoing poor weather led to further damage, and the vessel was eventually declared a total loss. Like a lot of these groundings, a lot of things was done wrong. Alcohol on the boat, in my opinion, not even one drink should be allowed. The skipper was tired, but I'm sure he's been on watch a lot more tired than that. He didn't use a watch alarm. In my opinion, that's just stupid. Yes, it's annoying, but it's there for a reason. It was bad weather at the time, that's why he stayed on watch. But he still wasn't paying attention, not close enough. The radar was probably basically useless because of the storm. And there was no reason not to have a second person in the wheelhouse just to keep an eye out. At the end of the day, everybody got off of this boat safe, and that's the main thing. But this beautiful boat was a total loss, and there was pollution. It doesn't say how much, but there was some. Good job to the all-weather lifeboat and the Coast Guard. They came through again and in not very good weather. Actually, really terrible weather. This could have been a lot worse, but at the same time, it didn't need to happen. They could have waited another day before they left, waiting for the weather to get better. But I'm sure they have been out in much worse weather than this. That's just life as a fisherman.